Thank you for watching Creative Backstories. My name is Kendall Brown, creative and entrepreneur. I'm on a mission to inspire others through the power of creativity. Today I'm in conversation with three persons who share the distinction of having planted a congregation and have now moved on to other realms of service and ministry. The first is Reverend Shanea Leonard, who is a minister, teacher, consultant, activist, and abolitionist who serves their community passionately through radical inclusion and advocacy. They have served on the front lines of dismantling oppressive systems for marginalized persons and being a voice for those they feel called to serve. Second is Reverend William Jeffrey Campbell, who is a Houston-based minister and longtime leader in the area of HIV care and prevention. Jeffrey has provided leadership for numerous agencies and organizations and is also a frontline fighter in his tireless work. The last is Bishop Joseph Tolton, who is a bishop in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and provides leadership for justice and liberation efforts in various countries on the continent of Africa and here in the United States. Enjoy the conversation. So let's start with just an introduction of, provide an introduction of who you are and what you currently do, and we'll backtrack to talk about the congregations that you started individually. So talk about who you are and your context and where you are and what you're currently doing. So whoever wants to go first.
I yield to the bishop.
Oh, you're kind. I am Bishop Joseph Tolton, and in my current capacity professionally, I am the president of Interconnected Justice. Interconnected Justice is a network that intentionally connects people of African descent on the continent of Africa with those of us in the diaspora. And we are very specifically focused on the proposition of building a network of faith leaders, academics, and civil society advocates and legal thinkers who are grasstops activists who have a notable reputation. They are influencers and change makers. But we partner this network with a network of grassroots youth leaders who are boots on the ground out there in the world, who can actually, hopefully, take from these more notable leaders some consultation and some guidance, and then mix it in with their own thoughts, and then actually provide directions for mobilizing change at the grassroots level. And we're very focused on building a network that can confront and tackle and ultimately subsume the global network of white Christian nationalism.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to have you here.
Amen. I can hand it off to Pastor Campbell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Campbell, native to Texas, a little town called Cuero, Texas, about 8,000 people now. Spent the last almost 40 years in Houston, with the exception of about 2.5 years I lived in Jersey. Currently, I am the Chief Executive Officer at Allies in Hope, formerly AIDS Foundation Houston. We are the oldest HIV prevention service organization in the state of Texas. And we do provide a plethora of services, from housing to addressing food insecurity with our two pantries.
A little slow again, Jeffrey. Not
of
sure.
course, we do HIV testing and STI testing, down. Rapid start.
Is that true for everyone else?
STI treatment.
He's frozen for me.
Of course, PrEP.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Yeah.
So I think it's certainly part of my calling.
Do you want to wait, or you want me to
sort
proceed?
of figured that out.
If you could go
while I was pastoring.
My name is Shanea D. Leonard. My pronouns are they, them, and I am originally from Philadelphia, but I currently reside in Louisville, Kentucky. Right now, I am the CEO of an organization called Abolition House. Abolition House is a holistic approach to embodiment and liberation. Our primary focus is Black women 35 and older queer folks, and then people who've been hurt and harmed in faith spaces. Our work centers around education, which is workshops, and various types of modalities like retreats. We also do individual coaching. I'm also a licensed, not licensed, but I am a trained and a certified sex doula. And so a lot of my work centers around the intersectionalities of sensuality and spirituality and how we help folks get really free in those areas. And currently, because of that work, I am now back in school pursuing a master's in marriage and family therapy so that I can work with, I predominantly work with queer couples too. And so a lot of that work intersects and overlaps, and a lot of folks can't afford me without the help of insurance. And so I've gone back to school to get the the theoretical foundation. I already got the theological, and to help folks to have access to their needs and the ways in which we decolonize the body, decolonize our minds, and decolonize our spirituality, all combined into one place. And so that's Abolition House. I also serve in roles that still connect with the church. I am assisting in being what's called a parish associate for the Presbyterian Church. I am a parish associate for a local congregation that my wife pastors, Peace Presbyterian Church, and I do that work as a helper there in certain ways. And then just actually overseeing a group of Black Presbyterian pastors in a group we call Sankofa, so providing some leadership and mentorship in that way as well. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Reverend. Glad to have you here. Jeffrey, welcome back. Let's see,
He's
you're
on
muted.
mute.
My apologies. This does not normally happen. It's rather abnormal. Did you all hear anything I said in my initial introduction?
You just talked about I heard through the name of your organization, your current organization,
Okay.
and your role there.
So I will say this. I'm getting a message that says I don't know if maybe this app is uploading and maybe that's the issue. But I'll start out again, or I'll pick up. So
you'll continue to get that notice.
Yes. Okay. So currently I am the Chief Executive Officer at Allies in Hope. We were for about 38 years known as AIDS Foundation Houston. We are the oldest HIV prevention service organization in the state of Texas. And I just happen to be, as of March 1st, 2023, the first African-American CEO of the organization. I know that has everything to do with how this HIV epidemic shifted over, the 4 or so decades that we've been in existence. So I'm happy to lead this organization. We provide housing both for people living with HIV as well as individuals who are not living with HIV, but due to their housing insecurity could be exposed to HIV just for the sake of needing a place to sleep, food pantries, and as well as connections to mental health services, mental health support. And we do PrEP in our clinic as well as Rapid Start for persons that are newly diagnosed with HIV or have been out of care for 12 or more months. And we treat STIs, and of course we do the HIV and STI testing. I would say one of the most wonderful things that we do is our Camp Hope. Started almost 30 years ago. It is a camp, initially 30 years ago, is for children who were mother-to-child transmissions and living with HIV and coming into camp at 7 years old. A lot of them were not expected to live out of their adolescent years. And now, today, because of medication and science, we have certainly expanded the footprint of camp. It is not just for children living with HIV. It is for their siblings. It is for children who are HIV negative, but have parents who are living with HIV. And one of the greatest testimonies I think that comes out of there are the number of young adults who come back every year. They started out as 7 and 8 year olds in camp. living with HIV, and now they are young adults living with HIV, but they're thriving, and they come back every year to give back to the camp that certainly carried them through their childhood and their teenage years.
So thank you, Jeffrey, for carving out some time. I know that you're doing amazing work in the city of Houston, and I'm so appreciative of our friendship and the ways in which you continue to show up for not only for myself but for numerous folks in the community. So, again, thank you all for carving out some time. I want to move forward by going backwards and way back. Talk to me, Bishop Tolton, about your process of discerning to start a congregation. What did that process look like for you, and can you point to the time when you began to sense that call?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
It actually began in an interesting way. I found liberation at Unity Fellowship Church of Christ in Brooklyn. This is, of course, the organization that was started by the late Archbishop Carl Beam. I left the Greater Refuge Temple Church of Our Lord Jesus Christ and found Unity Fellowship and made that transition. Unity required people to move through a pretty rigorous process to get into ministry and really didn't embrace moving people laterally, but you kind of had to really climb a pretty steep hill. So all of that said, the assistant pastor of the church in Brooklyn, Reverend Barbara Stevenson, she decided to start her own church, and she started a small, affirming Pentecostal church in Brooklyn called the Potter's House. And I went with her and served as her assistant pastor. She was very sickly. We started the church in the middle of December. And by Easter, which was the beginning of April of the next year, she fell very ill and was going to be out for literally 6 weeks to 2 months. So this was a baby of a congregation. I was an elder and kind of sort of the assistant pastor, and then she made me the assistant pastor when she got sick. And it meant that I had this congregation in my hands, and that's really where I began to discern and feel and understand the call to be a shepherd. And it was an opportunity for me to actually be as an under shepherd in the shepherd's role for that time. And that's really when I knew for sure. I'd always had the call to preach all my life since being very young, but that's really when I knew that this call to pastoring was what the Lord would have me to do. And so it was several years later after that, when I was no longer connected to that ministry, that I began to hear the Lord speak to me about the need to put together my Pentecostal self with my theologically inquisitive self and to build a house and a space for others who wanted to join that particular journey and marry that journey to a real focus on social justice. The marriage equality movement was starting, and there were rumblings of it, and it was beginning to happen. And so all of that was swirling at that time. And that's when I heard the Lord say, "Gay by God." And that really became kind of a mantra for me. I told my grandmother, who was a good old Baptist with some Pentecostal leanings, that this is what I wanted. And she said, "I'm going to walk this journey with you." She was 94 years old. And so together we went to the Y and rented space on Thursday nights. And I sent out some flyers. And for a year, I had services and worship services and just began to gather people. I met a sister by the name of Katrina Marsh because she was up at Columbia, and I was still connected to that space. And we found out that we were birthday twins. So that deepened our connection. And she was the first one to look at me and say, "Pastor." And that really resonated in my spirit. And her belief in me uh, was very deep and very important. And we really partnered in the launching of Rehoboth Temple, Christ Conscious Church. And again, I wanted to marry this idea of Rehoboth Temple, the Pentecostal side, with Christ conscious church being that more inquisitive side, in terms of being inquisitive about new understandings of theology and really moving toward more of an understanding of new thought, really, and stitching that all together. And so piece by piece, it certainly did come together. My personal background is in advertising and in marketing. And I thought, that's how I'll start my church. And I took out a full page ad in the Amsterdam News in May of 2006. And the headline was Gay by God, Progressive Pentecostals. And I basically wrote an open letter to the Harlem community expressing my feelings as a son of the village of Harlem and the Church of our Lord Jesus Christ as to why it was now time for Harlem to receive its gay son and its queer children and to embrace us fully. And that was the beginning of the journey.
Wow. Incredible. You didn't send that to Bishop Bonner, did you?
I actually did not, but the Saints brought it to him. Let me tell you.
I'm sure they did.
They brought it to him big time. They very much so did. It caused quite a stir, as you can only imagine. And a part of what I, wrote and signed off on was this idea of what kind of church is Rehoboth Temple? We're going to be a hand clapping, foot stomping, tongue speaking, baptized in Jesus' name,
So you were
LGBTQ
claiming that space,
claiming my apostolic heritage in a really true way.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Leonard. Tell me about the impetus of your church planting.
Sure. So back in Judah Fellowship was the name of our church, and in some ways is not really a true word to use there. Really is probably a better word. I was fighting for my ordination in the Presbyterian Church in 2008. I was outed by someone at the church I was serving as an associate pastor, and spent about the better part of a year in our denominational disciplinary process to keep my ordination, because at that time the Presbyterian Church did not look favorably upon ordained folks who were queer. And so once I was able to get out of that process and to really look at the wreckage of my life at that point, having lost a mentor, having lost a job, having had a shaky faith at that point, and really trying to find my footing and where I belonged in the church at that point, and went through a kind of a dark night of the soul, as it's called, and realized that I'm not the only one, right? That there are other people who look like me, who have similar stories, who've experienced church hurt and wounding, who need some place to gather, who need a place where they can still exercise their faith. And so kind of that wondering, that curiosity, and that need to gather is what was really the bedrock of Judah Fellowship. I don't want to say that it was born out of crisis, because that's not the truth. The truth is it was born out of curiosity and of pulling and a tugging in my spirit to still lead and still pastor, even though I had experienced such a traumatic situation and denomination. So not to sound super churchy, but what was meant for my bad ended up working for my good in a way. And then we were the only predominantly Black inclusive church in Western Pennsylvania at all. And so we started basically similar to Bishop Tolton, putting out flyers. I gathered a friend from seminary and said, hey, and it's so funny, it was a straight, cisgendered, right straight line Black guy who just happened to be affirming in his theology, and a friend. And I said, man, come help me do something over here. I believe that God is calling me to something. And we started that way. And I went to a white church that I had kind of been going to because I had lost my home church. And I said to the pastor there, I said, hey, I feel like God is calling me to something. He said, let's do it. It'll be fun. And so they kind of incubated our ministry for quite some time. And from that, we also produced what was called the Healing the Hurt Conference, which Bishop Tolton had actually been one of the guest speakers at. And that was a biannual conference to deal with the hurt, harm, and disconnect between faith and the LGBTQIA plus community. And so we began to turn our focus not just inward into spirituality and building congregation, but we became very much a community outward facing church. And so I pastored many more people than actually joined the church or actually walked through the doors. We were involved in a lot of social justice movement, a lot of on the ground work around not just LGBTQIA issues, but also anti-racism issues and poverty issues. We got involved in the fight for 15 when that was going on. We did. I was able to do trainings with the local law enforcement and civil organizations around intersectionality and various topics like that. And so we made our ministry into a social justice platform so that we can not only deal with your spirit, but deal with the situation and the ramifications of your community around your spirit. And so we really kind of lived on the idea of feed them before you teach them type of thing. And that's kind of how Judah got started. And that's kind of how Judah flourished in the sense that we care about what's going on with you in a very real and tangible way.
And what year was that when you officially started?
October 1st, 2011. In fact, October 1st is still Judah Fellowship Day in the city of Pittsburgh, officially by the mayor.
Wow. Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey.
You're muted.
Kendall, you're muted. Kendall, you're muted too.
Thank you. Jeffrey, I got to notice that you might have had... Okay. You're not muted.
Yes.
Are all of your tabs closed? I got to notice that you had maybe 2 of the apps open.
Yes.
Because your speed is noticeably slower than everyone else's.
That's what's going on. Thank you. I'm going to close every tab other than this tab. All right. Is that any better? Because everything is closed.
Let's see. That should impact the speed. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I was saying that I was 17 years old, it's called a preach thing, and I was doing a speech. It was a campaign speech for a student council vice president, and something happened. Certainly not something that was supposed to happen in the middle of a gymnasium, in a non-church service. And from that time on, I struggled with, first of all, I didn't want to preach. We can start there. Secondly, while I had not really accepted my sexuality, I felt like I couldn't marry the two. I couldn't be a preacher, couldn't be a pastor, and also be gay. So that went on for a long time. And finally, I accepted my call to preach in 1992. And, the deal with God was if I accept this call to preach, you'll take the homosexuality out of my life. That didn't happen. And then after some years of working in full-time ministry, doing various and sundry other things, I was working at a church, and I was the minister of music and programs. And a woman who is now my best female friend, she was the minister of Christian education. We were in charge of starting a new member orientation. And so we worked that out and named it Fresh Start Ministry. That came from me. And some years later, when I launched the ministry, it became Fresh Start Church. When I started Fresh Start Church in October of 2002, I was not yet out. I was out in spaces and places, but I was, not really out. And the more work I did, the more God said to me, you are not going to be able to do this work authentically until you come out of this closet everywhere. And the way that happened, I was asked to do a service for Houston Splash, which is our Black Pride. And so that was it. I had conversations with people. I talked to people that I felt like I needed to talk to. And then we had this worship service that was bigger than Fresh Start. And Shanea, you said you were clear that you pastored more people than were members of your church. And I've always felt like that. You know, we would go anywhere and we did a whole lot of things as a what I would call a small church that impacted individuals, whether it was feeding them, it was visiting them in the hospital, if it was creating safe spaces for them, if it was me getting up in the middle of the night to go meet one of my trans sisters at IHOP at 4 a.m. in the morning, to talk through the experiences that she was having that was really negatively impacting her life. That's what I did. And so I think that pastoring and then pastoring as an out gay pastor here in Houston. Matter of fact, I was the first out gay man, Black, to pastor here in, the fourth largest city in the nation. It took me a few years to really wrap my mind around that. But I always loved the reality of, in many ways, creating safe spaces for people. And so the work that I do now is still very similarly tied to it. And the work that I do now was really birthed out of the work that I did as a pastor. Because as you can imagine, at that time period, so many, particularly Black gay men, were struggling with living with HIV, living openly as a gay man. But I will tell you this, it was this one Black straight woman living with HIV who attached herself to our ministry, never became a member, but she was one of our most significant supporters, because in that space, she felt safe and at home. So I'm glad to have this conversation tonight, because it is reminding me of some of the really significant things that we were able to do in the time that I pastored.
Thank you. So let's move forward a little bit and skip over a whole lot because for the sake of brevity. I want to talk about the ways in which you, after you had been pastoring for a while, started to discern that it was perhaps something else that you were being called to do, or the place where you were, it was not the place where you wanted to continue being. What did that process look like? What sparked those conversations in your mind? What did that struggle look like? Any particular part that you want to speak to? What was that process like? Bishop Tolton?
Yes, I'm happy to speak to it. I was pastoring 4 years in, and it was my 4-year anniversary, and I wanted, I knew the fifth was going to be big, but I wanted to do something fun and cool. And leading into that year, as many of us knew, there was a moment when our brother Tone had an interview on Lexi and came out. And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder what's happening with him now that he's come out. He was in the PAW. I can only imagine what that experience was like. And I thought, let me reach out to him and see if there's any chance he would come and preach our 4th anniversary. And it turned out that he was very willing to do so. Not many other folks had really reached out to him. And he chose our anniversary as the first time that he was publicly, outside of his own church, going to preach as an openly gay man. And so we decided that there were all sorts of things that we wanted to do that weekend that he was here. And one of those things was go to church in Brooklyn. And we went out to New Life Tabernacle and worship with Bishop Figueroa. And then we had to jet back to Harlem for my service, which was at about 12:30. Bumper to bumper traffic getting from Brooklyn to Harlem. And a brother was tight. Okay. Let me just tell you, I was like, literally have a church full of people who are excited to hear this man. And so we were able to really kind of have a conversation while I was driving. And he said to me, the Lord has spoken to me and said, you are called to Rehoboth, but you're actually called to Africa. You're called to Uganda. And this situation that we're hearing about on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow about what's happening in Uganda, this is something that the Lord is going to put you in the middle of. And I thought, what? I mean, I just didn't even understand what the man was talking about, right? I've been to Africa once, but it was Cape Town for like a gay wedding, right? Like nothing to do with anything about going up into
Vineyards.
real. Yes, exactly. Real sub-Saharan Africa. Turns out that one of the places that I took him over that weekend, that Friday during business hours, was to GLAD, because I thought, they would be interested in his story in terms of getting him into the media. And we met with Ann Craig, the director of religion and values at GLAD. 2 weeks later, and I tell you, 2 weeks later, Saints, she called me and said, Bishop Christopher Sinyonjo is coming to America from Uganda. He is the only bishop or pastor or faith leader standing with the queer community. And I know he's going to be in front of all sorts of audiences. He needs to get in front of some African American LGBTQ people. And I remember you from the good meeting we had with Tone when you brought him to see me. I think you should host a town hall meeting. And you would do that well. You're very involved in social justice. And we were also, as a church, really involved in ministry on the internet, which was just happening. This was about 2010. So Bishop Christopher Sinyonjo came to the United States. I met him. He was a 70-year-old grandfather who had gone to Union and written about human sexuality in the 70s. We just kind of felt like we had known each other in a past life. He asked me after I hosted him at my church to clear my calendar for the week, to spend the week with him. I did. And on that Friday, he turned to me and said, I think you'll play well in Uganda, and the LGBT community needs a pastor. And I just, what do we say to these moments, right? What do we say to these moments that are just life-defining moments?
Yeah.
And Bishop Lunder said to me, well, if this is God's will, God will provide. And literally, just one person after the other said yes to giving to finance my trip. And you all know the story. I went to Uganda, and my entire life changed. I fell in love with the soil, with the land, the air, with our people, and with what was possible. But I also began to connect the dots around how this situation was so deeply connected to white Christian evangelism in our own church. And it took me back to those days of my mom preparing me for school. And every morning we watched the PTL Club. And the only Black people that they cried about were, starving kids in Ethiopia or Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't concerned about Watts. They weren't concerned about Southeast. They weren't concerned about Harlem. And that stuck with me. And so it came full circle for me as it related to who they were and what they really were all about, and the mission that God had before me. And I struggled with letting Rehoboth go. I birthed that congregation, blood, sweat, and tears, as we all have. And it was a very, very difficult struggle, but God made a way. Having lunch or dinner with Pastor Vanessa Brown one evening, talking about the struggle that I was going through. And she said, well, our struggle at our church is that we have to move because the building we're in is being condemned. We thought we could buy a building, but we were priced out. I said, well, what Sunday are you in need of being in worship? We looked at our calendars, and it turned out that the Sunday that they needed to be out of that building, I was going to be in Africa and the Ivory Coast. And it was like, well, this is perfect. You can, we'll worship together and you all will be there. And it was very clear to us at that moment that something much bigger was happening, and that the opportunity to combine our churches and merge them, and for me to cede my role as senior pastor and really have a ministry of presence in the local ministry as an associate pastor, and then turn my heart to this incredible and amazing opportunity that the Lord had provided for me, and so strategically throughout my entire life, as I look back at all the breadcrumbs that had been dropped that were leading to that kind of a ministry connecting the diaspora and the continent.
Well, I knew many parts of that story, but I did not know about the conversation from Brooklyn to Harlem.
Yes. Yes.
Just absolutely amazing. Reverend Leonard, tell me about when things began to shift for you.
Yeah. First of all, I was so excited to hear that story, Bishop Tolton. Thank you. I'm glad to get a chance to share it, to hear it. Yeah, so 2018, we were deeply involved in social justice in our city of Pittsburgh. And on top of that, I was also serving as a organizer, sorry, for Equality PA. So a lot of my work was very much outward facing. And we had also built a coalition of faith leaders and civil leaders in the city. And so I had just started getting burnt out, to be quite honest with you, of doing the work on the ground and seeing so much harm come
Yes.
to our people. And on June 19th, I believe it was 2018, a young black man got shot 3 times in the back by police. And he was 16 years old. I'll never forget him, Antoine Rose II. And it was an outcry from the black community in our city. And there are mega churches in Pittsburgh, there are medium-sized churches in Pittsburgh, all the things. But our little church, Judah Fellowship, was the main leading faith voice crying for justice for this young man. How could this be? How could this little church of 65 members rolls, hundreds that never would come into the church, how could we be the ones demanding justice and calling other faith leaders to the carpet? We were, and that work, it was a lot. It was a lot, and we were also involved in a fight for 15 fair living wage for folks. And I said at that point, I said, you know what? I'm getting burnt out doing this work so much on the ground every day. My marriage was suffering at that time. I was suffering. I said, there's got to be a way that I can do something different from the inside out. And so I applied for a job within the denomination headquarters. I'm Presbyterian. And I got it. And the job that I got was specifically around gender and racial justice, what I knew the most about. And so my whole point was to move towards a covert mission, to leave the small church, which is a hard thing to do when you're a founder. You all know that. But to make that leap, to try to make change from the inside out, I ended up continuing at the denomination, became the director of the department I originally came into, just to try to see if I could make a change within that time, that tenure. Marriage changed in the church. And of course, by 2015, we had marriage equality in our country. And so there was a lot of things shifting, but there was still so much work to be done. And so that's one of the reasons why I say Judah is not a was, but it is, because in many respects, I've never stopped pastoring that congregation. During COVID, we picked back up and started having services online because folks didn't have anywhere to go and they were reaching out. And I'm like, look, I'm not going to have individual conversations with everybody every week. Let's all get together. And then there are some ways in which I still have connection to almost all of the folks of that congregation. So in many ways, I'm still pastoring them. So I've shifted out of being a local pastor into doing something that hopefully made more of a systemic change than an individual change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I'm hearing from both of these conversations is that it's been a very natural progression, and that one door has led to the next door, and the running thread through all of this has been faithfulness to the call. And as our bishop says, where God leads, God feeds, and where God guides, God provides. Jeffrey, tell me about your journey.
So started the church as a Bible study in 2002. We had our first worship service in January of 2003. And, again, we didn't start as an affirming church. I didn't even know the language, to be very honest with you. But what I did know, and I did say, is I knew that God wanted this ministry to be for anyone, even if they had blue hair and 10 nipple rings. And, back in 2003, saying that to particularly Black people, that was a big thing. But I said it, and I said it a lot. And shortly after, a couple of things happened. In July of 2003, my mother passed away. And that was a real hard hit for me, even though I knew she was, I knew that her transition was coming. It was still very hard. And one of the things that I see now, and I saw it years ago, our ministry attracted so many, well, and you're going to all three say, yes, you're absolutely right, because it's for us. So many wounded people, wounded by church, wounded by family, wounded by relationships. And they were heterosexual, they were homosexual, they were transgender, gay, lesbian, queer, all of the things. Um, and, and so I'm pastoring these people in a time where I am grieving in a way like never before. But I continue to do it. And I would say too that pastoring our people, there was that we had our own brand of foolishness, so every now and then somebody would reach out to me and tell me about the greeter that was tickling them in the palm at the door. And I was like, oh my God. And also, so let me be clear. I had not done a whole lot of things as far as the club scene and all of that. I hadn't until I started pastoring. And pastoring, it put me in the community, particularly when I came, all the way out. So I was experiencing so much, but through all of that, I was growing weary. And, I began to pray. By that time I met Bishop Plunder, and, I talked with her. I talked with other individuals that I consider to be mentors in ministry. And it was a challenge to let go. But I knew, just in very simple terms, if I didn't move on, I was going to lose my mind and perhaps my life. Like I've heard everyone here say, we're still pastoring a lot of the people that we pastored during those times when we were, formally pastoring. And so I've done weddings for those folks. I've done funerals. I get phone calls. It's all, I'm still tied to the work. I'm no longer pastor, what I call under a steeple, but I'm still the community's pastor. And I do think, and I don't think, I believe that going through that experience, and doing the work I do now, and have really been doing now for about 25 years, it has helped community to see me as a trusted voice and a trusted confidant, to have conversations with me that they would never have with anyone else. So I believe that Fresh Start Church was part of the foundation for who I am now and what I do now. So it was a journey, but I survived.
Wow. Campbell, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Trying to cut down on any background noise. My dog is outside of my door, so he's mad because he's not in here. So for these next questions, everyone doesn't have to answer, but feel free to jump in where you would like. Can anyone speak to the grief that resulted from your moving on, and how you process that, and what are some learnings or some takeaways from that process?
I could. Oh, go ahead, Jeffrey.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll go on mute.
No. I would say that I still have grief, even to this day. I still struggle with the idea of abandonment, knowing that it's not about me, knowing that it's God's work and knowing that it was time. Let it all be true, right? Because the head and the heart have a conversation in which they don't always agree. And so the pull that I still get sometimes from some of those folks, I mean, there's a marriage that I'm counseling right now that are members of that congregation. And so I do sometimes the grief level is not the same, but the idea of abandonment, the idea of knowing that we were the only ones and I left. And when I tried to put succession in place, it didn't really work out in the same way. And so feeling like, that whole idea around how organizations period end up when founders leave and some of them, a good chunk of them crumble, and feeling that remorse as well is still something I had to battle. Right. And then still in the midst of that, which is probably why I'm going to be a therapist, in the midst of that, still saying, but it's not about you, Shanea. It's not about you. But when you make that personal connection with folks in the congregation, it's really hard. I mean, I had one person who stopped talking to me as she talks back to me now. So you left me, Pastor. You left me. And it hurt to the core, particularly with people, as we've already stated, who've already been hurt in faith spaces. And it feels like you're throwing another dagger at them. And to sit there and to be the culprit of what you said you would help be the liberator of it's a very interesting juxtaposition to be in.
Indeed. We had City of Refuge, DC. We had folks who were driving from Newark, New Jersey, folks who were driving from Philadelphia, folks who were driving from Richmond, Virginia, and I too still to this day deal with that same kind of grief. Even when you know that that God's plan was unfolding, it's still difficult. Jeffrey.
Yes. So thank you for this question. And I think you and I, and then one other friend, we've probably talked the most about the period, not the period, but the ongoing grief of walking away, because it's, I pastoring in the Black community is a whole big old thing. And it is, there's a degree of reverence, even if you only have 3 members. People like, that's the pastor. He's the pastor. He's the pastor in the family. He pastored. And so I felt a long time like I had failed, and I had to have some therapy. I had to have some therapists walk me through that process and talk me through that process, and then listen to me and respond appropriately to really get beyond it. Because the interesting thing, I wasn't grieving just one thing. I was grieving this church that God had allowed me to stand up. I was grieving the loss of that, but I was also still grieving the loss of my mother. And I was also grieving the loss of people who had walked away or distanced themselves, not just because I had come out, but I had come out and I kept preaching. And what I was preaching was so vehemently against what they had preached and what they had taught and how they had been raised. So I was grieving a lot and grieved for a long time. And there are a few people who died before we were able to reconcile, while there were others that, and this is kind of, I think, another thing about not just the pastoring piece, but the work I do in HIV. God keeps affirming me. It's because, I've had women that I know who have sons who are gay and now living with HIV call me and say, hey, people I've sung in choirs with, people I've been members of other churches with, those types of things. I know God said, I need to give you 4 years as pastor, and then you're going to go on and you're going to do this HIV thing, and you're going to be just out, 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 out. You're so far away from your closet, there's no way of getting back into it. But still, and even when I look at, other folks who are pastoring, when I look at Bishop Allen, when I look at OC Allen, I'm like, we started these churches about the same time. What should I have done differently? What should I have been in a relationship? I think through all of that. And it's quite interesting, but I know that I did what I was supposed to do. And yet my heart still misses it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you for that frankness. And you led us right to my next question, which is there anything you would have done differently as you reflect on your process of moving on and moving out of the role of founding pastor? Can anyone speak to that?
I think that I would have, knowing what I know now, I would have been more confident about the transition and certainly less fearful about it. One of the things that's really blessing my heart about this conversation is to hear from my colleagues the ways in which they are still soul tied to the people that they pastor, which suggests to me that we were not just pastoring, but shepherding, which I just find to be very beautiful and extremely heartwarming, because those ties are really eternal, right? And what a wonderful thing that is. But I would say if I were to do anything different, I think I would have a more confidence. I would have relaxed through the process more. We used to have leadership and convocation both in the same year. There was a leadership meeting where I literally had a holy meltdown. They had to go get Bishop London. They didn't know what was happening to me. I couldn't stop crying. It was like, I literally had a meltdown. She had to come and lay hands on me, to put the cold water compresses on my head, because I didn't know what was happening, but I was letting go of my church before I knew
That was a
that
little
I was.
Baptist, Bishop.
It was very Baptist at that moment, child. I was making noise, Exactly. I had that moment.
Smelling
But I think I
salts
would,
and
yes. I think I would have just had more peace and stillness
yeah,
about
yeah,
this being the fluid will of God. Because honestly, growing up like we did, when you start pastoring, that's what you're supposed to do till you die, right? When we come
yeah,
from where we
yeah,
come from. So I felt like somehow this had to be out of step with what my destiny was, when in fact it was the exact opposite.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Same. I would have. There would have been less timidity and more intentionality around
Yes.
really steering the process and making sure that that folks were at the table supporting me and the congregation through that process, and because I took a lot of it upon myself, and some of the folks, to be honest and to be really transparent, it was up until the day that I transitioned out that they were still saying, "No, you can do this. You can do this. You can do this. You should stay. You should stay." And just weren't providing the kind of support that I needed, and they weren't saying the kinds of things that I needed for a person who had already made up their mind. Anyone else? Anything that you would have done differently?
I would have left out the front door rather than the back door,
Mm.
figuratively speaking. Yeah. Although I'd had a conversation with the core of the ministry, it was still months later, and they didn't believe me. And so we had been in a rehearsal with our little small singing group, and I don't even remember now what the song was. And I had been talking to one of the associates, and he he said after that rehearsal, he says, "You know now, don't you?" I'm like, yeah, I just don't know how I'm going to do it. And I left a letter. That was trashy. That was really trashy. It really was. That's all I could do in that moment. That's all I could do. But if I could go back and do anything over again in that part of that, as that part of my life, it would be the way that I left. Now, I know I did this to try to, make it better. I continued to tithe into the church after I left the church. And then when I found another church, I said, well, I can't tithe fully, but I'll do this, to financially support the church. Because I was at that. That's the least I can do. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think for me, I would have tried to prepare the folks better.
Yes.
I would have did a little bit more intentional work around how I prep them for transition. I think that my own personal need and personal burnt outedness, if I can create a word, kind of superseded a bit of my need to prepare the congregation. I mean, I didn't leave in a bad term. I had a great going away. The mayor was there. People we had helped in the community were there. It was a very nice little going away. But the next Sunday, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
No matter how many leaders were in place, they didn't know what to do. And it was reflective on how that congregation proceeded. So I wish I would have prepared them a little bit better. I still think, even though with grief, I still know it was the right decision, and I have no regrets. But I just wish I could have prepared them better.
And so, as we move to wrapping up the conversation, I want to ask you to just jump in wherever you'd like. What would you offer to someone who's either contemplating starting a church or contemplating perhaps walking away or evolving into another role? Are there any words that you would like to offer this evening?
Yes.
Perhaps think about it. Sorry, go ahead, Pastor.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm gonna attribute this to Kendall. Is Barbara Brown Taylor or Barbara Taylor Brown?
Barbara Brown Taylor. Yeah.
Barbara Brown Taylor, Episcopal priest, book, Leaving Church. And one of the statements that she writes in the book is that callings have beginnings and endings. And I don't know if they all do, but I think our white counterparts really know that. But our culture is, you get in a church, I mean, even for membership, they don't like that. Oh, she moves around. She's always at a different church, every
Church
2
hopper.
years. Yes, a
Yes.
church hopper. There you go. Church
Taking up
hopper.
space.
Yes. And but certainly when you start preaching and pastoring, you may not pastor the same church, but you're supposed to pastor until you draw your last
Till you
breath.
die.
Yes. And so that book, that sentence gave me life. Now, it was years after I'd stepped away from the church itself, but it helped me. It helped me heal. It helped me heal. It helped me embrace the fact that what I do now is ministry. And there are, a few other things that I do that I know are ministry. So I would say to them, go into this knowing that you might not be doing this until the day you die, and God will be okay with it.
Indeed.
I would just add to that. I think, building on what Pastor said, that perhaps we think about it as a project that has a particular aim, which means that maybe it will have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that finiteness is by no means failure, but actually success. And thinking about it more in terms of what does God want to accomplish with and through me in this season, as it relates to this particular people. And maybe it will go on in perpetuity, but then you're not necessarily tied to it in perpetuity, but you're tied to that moment that God wants to use you in that specific way. And I think that I would definitely advise pastors today, there's got to be a new model. I think all three of us, all four of us, put the church on our back and we just carried the thing, right? It was not going to die. We were going to feed it. You know, we were practically the praise and worship leader, the usher, the Sunday. I mean, just because we're church people, like we were raised. But I do think a new model has got to come forward where there's more of a table of pastors that can really take this on in more of a committee style. I just feel like that's perhaps even healthier for this time in which we live.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Indeed.
And to piggyback on that, I would just say, not be afraid to be authentically different. That your model of ministry does not like to look like what you've come out of.
Oh, God.
And to release yourself from that need to have a certain number of people, a certain way of worship, a certain order of things, to meet a certain goal and criteria of someone else you've seen, and to really lean into where God is calling you. I love the idea that Bishop just said about even having a table or a council, right? Because church does not have to look like what we know church to be. That is not the only way that God chooses to show up in God's form, and to really be open to how Spirit is leading. I have a friend who's pastoring what the Presbyterian Church calls a new church development, a new worshiping community, and it's built on, of all things, cannabis. And so they have it's called The Table, Every Table in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm not saying that to promote or not promote cannabis. What I'm saying is that they are leaning into something in a different area, in a different way, in a different genre that others have not. And so finding that unique niche where God has called you, because God has called you to be you and no one else can. And then how is God using that particular gifting to do something different? Nobody wants church as usual. Nobody. Do something different and be true to that. And that's where the blessing is.
Yeah, indeed.
There's so much freedom in what you just said. It was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn that I was not pastoring the Gay Refuge Temple. And I grieved when it wasn't manifesting itself as such, and really had to get delivered from that to free myself up for this ministry to be authentically what God had called it to be. That is such beautiful advice and such necessary advice, Pastor.
Thank you, Bishop.
Yeah. It's such a hard lesson to learn, because we want to be what we've seen, and we want to be, we want to be the church where grandmama was, and where auntie was, and all of those things. And I'm in communion with the ancestors, and I have ancestors that like to shout and fall out and act a fool in church, and and so that's what they expect. But that's not necessarily my journey or the people that I'm called to serve. So I want to thank you all. I have been blessed and helped by this conversation, and it's my hunch that someone else will be blessed by it as well. And I think there might be some future conversations that will possibly happen from this conversation tonight. So thank you. I want to close with, if there is anything that's bringing you joy in this moment, in this crazy, chaotic world, name something that's bringing you joy.
Can I go first?
Sure.
What brings me the most joy right now, I get excited just like it's my wife. I'm still a newlywed. I got married a year ago. And the thing that brings me the most joy is my relationship. And right now we've got our grandbaby in town, and it's just full of joy in this season. So it's my wife. I'm unashamedly saying that, not because she's sitting next to me, but because it's the truth.
That is amazing.
We sharing that joy with you.
Amen. Amen. In the midst of these incredibly hard times, and for those of us who believe in justice, and particularly racial justice, I think that what has happened to Black people in the last year has caused an incredible amount of trauma that will take us many years to be healed. But the Spirit keeps reminding me what a privilege it is to actually be among those who are called to be a part of what it means to push back and to resist, and to really revel in that opportunity and in that privilege, and to find joy in that, even in the midst of what we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I believe it is family. And so I wasn't, there's a lot of my dad's family that I did not know. I knew they existed, but I didn't know them up close and personal until 2019 and on. So developing those relationships um, with good old Kojic, we got a whole branch of the tree that's Kojic, and they love this gay boy. Let me tell you, I was on my way to a family reunion. I was like, "What in the world?" And I was like, "Well, I've lived this long without them. I can keep living if they act up." But no, they follow me. They support my work, and I just get joy out of having family. I grew up as an only child, so that brings me joy. And my friends, I have some of the best friends, my close circle, best friends in the whole wide world. So great joy.
Amen.
Well, this conversation has brought me joy. And again, thank you. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your participation and your willingness and your generosity. I know how all of our schedules are, and I don't take it for granted that you took out time for this conversation. So thank you. I will keep you posted as things get edited and things get posted. I'll give you a heads up so that you're aware, and so that you can share it with others, and others can be blessed by it. So again, thank you.